Hi, this is Tom Gilbert, Water Resources Specialist with the Maine Forest Service, and I have a brief presentation here for you about stream crossing permitting requirements for timber harvesting activities. The first thing you want to look at in deciding whether you need a permit is to see whether the stream channel meets our definition of a stream. The stream channel will need to have defined banks. They would need to have a exposed parent material bed. Basically, it needs to have a stream bed, usually composed of sand or rock. It may even be a more dark, organic kind of mucky material as well. That's also considered parent material. As long as it doesn't have upland vegetation growing within it, is considered a parent material bed. And it must also be connected to another water body, either another stream or even a wetland would count towards that hydrological connection. And this does not include rills or gullies in disturbed soils. Here's a couple examples here of stream channels that meet our definition. On the left there, you can see it's pretty obvious that it meets our definition because it has some very defined banks. I'm pretty confident that if I had a look at that stream bed, it'd be some sand or rock or cobbles in there. And the one on the right there may be a little less obvious. The banks there are pretty small, maybe a foot or less in height, but they are defined banks there, and you'll see that there are some stone and cobble there for a parent material bed. A couple examples here of some channels that are not considered streams. You'll see on the left there looks like a skidder rut. We don't construe any man-made kind of rutting as stream channels. And on the right there we have looks like a groundwater seep. There's no defined banks there. It just kind of looks like a forested wetland. It's a groundwater seep, not something we consider a stream channel. If you're deciding on a permanent crossing, a permit will be required, and that goes for any protected natural resource, including streams and brooks, rivers, non-forested freshwater wetlands. So if you are in a wetland that is dominated by trees that are 20 feet tall or higher, that is a forested wetland. There's no permit requirement there. But if you have vegetation that's smaller than 20 feet, it's not dominated by trees, it's a non-forested wetland. And then coastal wetlands as well. You notice an asterisk beside a few of those resources. Those will require a full NRPA permit. That's a higher level permit, a little more involved process, whereas the streams and brooks are typically a permit by rule, a less involved permitting process, which I'll talk about soon. For temporary crossings, there is no permit requirement. A crossing is considered temporary if it's in place for no more than 7 months in a calendar year. And any structures using fill are not considered temporary. So if you're using, for example, a culvert with some gravel fill over it, and you're going to pull that culvert within 7 months, it wouldn't matter. It would still be considered permanent crossing. I'll take this moment here to plug the Maine Forestry Bridge Program. We have some portable skidder bridges available for loan across the state. We have steel bridges that come in lengths of 20 and 24 feet or 12 and 14 feet wide, as well as some wooden bridges around 16 to 20 feet long and in various widths. And here's a list of where you can find those bridges. This is a copy of a brochure we have about this program, which I will provide a link to later on in the presentation. But you'll see here that often you're going to find a bridge at your county soil and water conservation district, or you could also contact your Maine Forest Service district forester to get a hold of one of those bridges. So here we have a quick reference chart for stream crossing permitting for timber harvesting activities. I think this might be one of the more useful documents to you in deciding whether you need a permit and what kind of permit you would need. And we tried to design this in a way that shows you how these laws interact with one another. You see that this big blue box houses the Natural Resources Protection Act, which is basically the basis for all the other rules. And then within that you see towns that have adopted statewide standards, those towns that have not, and then the unorganized territory. So I want to go through this chart with you, go through each one of these boxes to get you a bit familiar with how this is set up. So let's start with the Natural Resources Protection Act. This is a statewide law, and again, kind of the basis for all the other permitting requirements. You'll see here that it says a permit by rule, or PBR, is required for any permanent structure. It describes what a temporary structure is and explains that no permit is required for temporary structures. This section here where it describes timing, basically if you're installing a structure between October 2nd and July 14th, you need to get approval from IFNW, so it's a good reminder there. And there's a request for approval form you would need to fill out and return to them, and I'll talk about that a bit more soon. It explains some exemptions for maintenance and repair, and explains that a full NRPA permit is required for crossings of some resources. Now moving on to towns that have adopted statewide standards for timber harvesting in shoreline areas, also known as Chapter 21. Most of these towns have adopted these standards under Option 1, which means they've turned over full enforcement authority to the Maine Forest Service, and in this case only a permit by rule is required for a permanent stream crossing. Some towns have adopted these standards under Option 2, which is a joint enforcement effort between the town and Maine Forest Service. And in this case, a PBR is also required for a permanent stream crossing, but they may also have some local permanent requirements. So you want to make sure by looking through their ordinance whether those local permitting requirements apply or not. For those towns that have not adopted statewide standards in shoreline areas, you want to have a close look at the town ordinance to see if they have any local permitting requirements. It's more likely that they do if they haven't adopted statewide standards, and a PBR is also required in these towns. Now moving on to Chapter 27 rules, those that apply in the unorganized territories. Technically the NRPA also applies here, but as many of you probably know, these rules look a lot different than those NRPA permitting requirements. You see that it really depends on what subdistrict you're in or what kind of water body you're crossing. You see here that it says that new permanent crossings on a PSL2 requires that you submit a forest operations notification, as you would anyways, but also identify that crossing on there and include a map as an attachment to that. In addition, a forest operations permit is also required in these following subdistricts, and may also be required in these subdistricts as well under certain circumstances, in which case I ask that you contact the Maine Forest Service to verify. There may also be a requirement for a bridge construction permit. That's kind of the higher level permitting option in the unorganized territory. These are required for PSL1 streams, as well as any crossing within these subdistricts here, and may be required within these subdistricts. And again, you should contact the Maine Forest Service to verify whether a bridge construction permit is required in either of these subdistricts. And at the bottom you find contact info. Depending on where your crossing is located, you'll see contact info for the Maine Forest Service there. Or if it's a permit by rule, if you're pretty sure it's a PBR, I process those permits statewide, so you can always contact me for any questions on that. And here's a look at that permit by rule application form. This form looks a lot like the DEP permit by rule application form, so you want to make sure this is the Maine Forest Service form. You'll see MFS permit right at the top there. Fill out some basic information, contact information, and some site information, and down here you'll check a box depending on whether you are in a town that has adopted statewide standards, or if they have not, you would check this NRPA box. And when you check these boxes, you're basically certifying that you are following all the rules associated with the NRPA and or the statewide standards. So you want to be sure to be familiar with these rules before you go ahead and install these structures. And please be sure to submit this before your construction activities begin. If this is an after the fact application, we do double that permitting fee. Here's a look at that IFNW form. This is that form that you would need to submit to IFNW for installations between October 2nd and July 14th. This is a time of year where fish are particularly sensitive, and it's a time of year where the water is a little higher. So if you're installing a structure during these times, please make sure to submit this to IFW ahead of time. You would need to have them sign off on this, and you provide that with your permit by rule when you submit that. Again, you have to have this filled out and signed by IFW and submit that along with your permit by rule. Here's a look at the Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife regional offices. If you have a stream crossing that was going to require one of those forms, this is some contact information. Depending on where that crossing is located, will determine who you're contacting. You can just take a quick screenshot of this or jot some info down to get that info. Otherwise, you can always call their main office in Augusta and be connected to the right person. To find our forums, you can go to Maineforestservice.gov, and if you can navigate to the Water Resources section of the website, you click on Forest Policy and Management, and under that you find Water Resources. And in this Water Resources section, if you want a copy of that brochure for that temporary skidder bridge, you'll find that in this link here, Best Management Practices, and you'll also find the that permitting quick reference chart that I showed you is also located in this link here, this Best Management Practices link. And you'll see other links that also are relevant to stream crossing permitting. Statewide standards, for instance, is right here as well. If you're looking for a permit by rule application, you can also find that on our website. If you look on the left here under Rules and Regulations, you would click that. It would bring you to this page here, and here on the right you see the NRPA permit by rule form. Again, it's important that you find our form rather than submitting DEP's form. We cannot process the DEP permit application. Thanks for watching. Please do not hesitate to contact me or any of your Maine Forest Service district foresters with any questions, or if you want to have a site visit. We're always willing to come out there and discuss. Thank you very much.